Welcome to a Legendarium special about my 5 least favorite adaptations of A Christmas Carol. Continuing with my quick change of pace, I'm going to be talking about 5 film adaptations of A Christmas Carol that I feel really missed the mark and why they did. At number 5 on this list, I'm putting the 1951 British adaptation starring Alastair Sim. I regret putting this adaptation on the list because it is a nostalgic piece for me. I saw it on AMC during middle school, and for me, it became the first grown-up adaptation that I saw of this film. The movie is well regarded by many, and I can see why. Alastair Sim gives a very animated performance, and he really sells the early scenes when he is being cruel and obnoxious. It even includes a scene that needs to be in more adaptations when Scrooge sees other condemned spirits wandering the earth, lamenting that they can no longer make amends and getting a taste of what awaits him if he doesn't repent. In fact, things go reasonably well until the Ghost of Christmas Past arrives. There, the film takes a sudden detour when Scrooge's sister Fan dies, giving birth to his nephew Fred. Since she is the only person who really loved him, Scrooge's heart turns to stone. Yet instead of simply becoming a cold-hearted miser, he transforms into a white-collar criminal, a Victorian Gordon Gekko. Over an extended montage, we see him leave Fezziwig's employment, take information about the Fezziwig firm to a predatory businessman. He helps to ruin his kindly former employer and then takes over his office. After that, Scrooge, Marley, and their mentor embezzle from the firm and blackmail the other board members into giving them controlling interest. And for a final trick, Scrooge swipes the house and estate of his partner in white-collar crime, Jacob Marley, as he lies on his deathbed. This elevates Scrooge into a different plane of wrongdoing. In the past, he caused harm by not caring, but he could do good by caring. Now he is knowingly ruining lives and reputations for his own gain. This is my own perspective, but going through the rest of his life with a smile on his face would not make up for that. For me, his real redemption would involve turning state's evidence on his former partners in white-collar crime. For number 4 on the list, I placed the 1938 adaptation starring Reginald Owen. Ironically, this film, which came from the golden age of Hollywood, has held up the least. Its problems start at the beginning, when the film spends 5 minutes watching nephew Fred hanging out with the Cratchit children and then palling around with Bob before Scrooge finally shows up. That isn't the first time that Scrooge becomes something of an afterthought in his own story, which takes a lengthy digression when Scrooge fires Bob the day before Christmas. And in a bizarre turn of events, Bob Cratchit has a meltdown in the streets, laughing hysterically, and then squandering whatever money he has on buying a lavish Christmas feast for his family. Of course, Bob might be able to do this because, according to this film, the famously impoverished Cratchit family is fabulously rich. During extended scenes in the Cratchit house, we see a live-in maid, custom-painted chinaware, and finery, which shows the supposedly impoverished Cratchits as well-to-do. When we are told Tiny Tim died towards the end because the family couldn't afford medical care, it makes one wonder why they didn't just sell off some of the porcelain. And as for Scrooge, his redemption comes too fast. In fact, after the Ghost of Christmas Present, he becomes so happy that he starts hallucinating about Christmas. And this is a big problem since in the book Scrooge isn't truly repentant until the Ghost of Christmas Yet to Come does what he does. In short, there's nothing offensive about this film, but you can do better. Number 3 is a 1935 British adaptation of the story starring Seymour Hicks. I don't know if this film appeared better during its original release, but the copies I've seen have consistently been murky, poorly lit, and had music tracks so bad that they distracted from the overall film. It sounded as if nobody had bothered to tune their instruments. Seymour Hicks does his best and deserves praise for playing Scrooge as a bad-tempered old man who seems to genuinely loathe everybody that he meets, especially those who say Merry Christmas. The actor who plays Bob Cratchit does look gangly and seems perpetually anxious around his cruel boss, so he gets high marks too. Unfortunately, both actors are let down when the film suddenly stops after Cratchit is let off for Christmas. We have an extended sequence of holiday shopping, which leans heavily into slapstick, even including a guy getting slapped across the face with a fish. It leads up to a grand banquet at the Lord Mayor's Palace, hosted by a mayor who weighs about 350 pounds, yet somehow hoists himself out of his chair to lead the guests in singing "God Save the Queen" before we suddenly return to Scrooge. That digression, which has nothing to do with Scrooge, by the way, apparently took up most of the film's budget, because the film did not even have an actor to play the ghost of Jacob Marley. Instead, Seymour Hicks spends 5 minutes speaking to an empty chair while an off-screen voice talks back. Things get worse with The Ghost of Christmas Past, which tells us nothing of Scrooge's childhood and opens with him berating delinquent debtors who, for all we know, really did welch on their loans. This leads his fiancée to leave him, and the sequence is made unsettling by the fact that the 64-year-old Hicks is playing his younger self and still looking 64 years old, while his fiancée is young enough to be his daughter. It also doesn't help that the Ghost of Christmas Present resembles a demon of gluttony gorging himself on turkey, frequently being shown wreathed in flame and laughing hysterically. My number 2 spot on the list goes to a 2019 adaptation starring Guy Pearce. I mentioned that the 1951 adaptation starring Alastair Sim suffers from spending too much time on The Ghost of Christmas Past and making Scrooge a white-collar criminal instead of a merely misanthropic miser. This version takes both major problems from the 1951 version and ratchets them up tenfold. In this adaptation, Scrooge is not simply a miser or a corrupt businessman, but he has the blood of hundreds of people on his hands. His entire business strategy is based not on lending money at high interest, but purchasing debt-crippled companies, running them into the ground, selling off the assets, and then wiping the ledgers clean. This malpractice has led to mine collapses in Wales and factory fires in Manchester. In fact, the ghost of Jacob Marley mentions that every link on his chain represents somebody who died in one of their factories or their mines, which makes you wonder just how many deaths those two were responsible for. And since Marley and the Ghost of Christmas Past dominate the first 2 hours and 20 minutes of this 3-hour miniseries, the other two ghosts have barely any time to make an impact. Christmas Yet to Come only gets to show Tiny Tim's death before showing Scrooge his grave. And the Pierce Scrooge's redemption feels completely hollow and unearned because he barely seems repentant, and it's hard to believe that such a monster ever would resolve to change his ways. Which is a terrible shame because this miniseries has a strong cast and some truly compelling visuals. This really should have been made into Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities or Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, just as the Alastair Sim version might have been remade into The Rise and Fall of a Victorian White-Collar Criminal. Yet, as a Christmas Carol, both versions fail. Finally, the worst adaptation of A Christmas Carol that I've seen is a 2012 adaptation that I have found little information on, save that it was produced by a small independent company in the United Kingdom. It also had a DVD release which found its way into my local library, and if not for that, I likely wouldn't have heard of it. It's clear the production did not have much in the way of resources, but it did not use them or its running time well. With no money to build Victorian sets, the director combined close-ups of real houses with shots of ruins to create the illusion of a set. This also leads to numerous cuts from the actors to either solid brick walls or clouds drifting through the sky. Even stranger, the film, on at least 10 occasions, cuts to random actors wandering through hallways in period costume, often with blank expressions and white pancake makeup. As if that isn't strange enough, most of the actors seem to be barely awake throughout the film. The scene when Scrooge's fiancée is especially jarring, since the two are breaking off their engagement and expressing their disappointment at their heartrending separation, yet both the actor playing Scrooge and his fiancée have blank expressions and flat monotone voices. We never even see the two of them next to each other, making me wonder if the actors were ever in the same room together. When Bob Cratchit grieves for Tiny Tim, the actor is trying to convey grief, but the director keeps cutting back to the rest of the Cratchit family on the couch, who just look bored. And on top of that, it is so sunny outside and with so much greenery that it really should be called a Midsummer Carol. Low-budget films can do extremely well. El Mariachi, for example, created a memorable action film with a budget of only 4 figures, so low-budget films can excel, but if they don't use their running time and resources, well, they can't. That wraps things up for this episode of The Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.